Welcome to Back in Crime, a podcast presented by Texas Crime Travelers. I'm Stewart Fillmore, retired FBI agent.
And I'm Todd Hiles, retired Secret Service agent. In this podcast, we cover cases we worked and some we wish we had.
As lifelong street agents, we were where the rubber met the road.
While the big guys were doing press conferences, we were interviewing the criminals.
And because of that, we can take you inside these cases.
And under the crime scene tape.
This is Back in Crime. Welcome to Back in Crime. This is episode 1 of our much-anticipated podcast. We've had so many comments and messages asking for a Texas Crime Travelers podcast, and so many of you have been asking for a deep dive on the JFK assassination. So here we go.
For some background, about a month ago, we posted a video about a news story that broke. And in this news story, that if it's true, it upends the Warren Commission conclusion that Lee Harvey Oswald acted alone. The video blew up, and we had about 700,000 views in the first 12 hours when we were notified that the video was removed for a community guidelines violation and that our account received a strike and that we were at risk for being banned. You know, we were sort of confused because we know the community guidelines well, and we didn't do anything to violate them. So we appealed their decision. They denied our appeal. We emailed back and forth, and we never heard back from them.
Yeah, it's just absolutely nuts. So I'm confused. I still don't really understand it.
I mean, we reported on what the news article said.
Exactly. And really, I mean, like if the story is true, it is only when it could be problematic for the government, right?
Right.
And there are a lot of problems with the story itself, and we'll get into that. So I just don't understand why it needed to be removed.
And, you know, we left so many of our followers confused because they were asking us what happened to the video. They wanted to see it again.
Yeah, so for all those folks out there that sent in questions and they just couldn't figure out what happened, guess what? We can't either. So we're with you on that one. So the JFK assassination is a huge case. There's so many aspects to it. There's so many things to it. And I've been into it a long time. At various times, I'll be more into it than others, because it's something that fascinates me, but always there seems to be some new angle that comes out. Somebody's found some new, thing to investigate on it, and that will get my curiosity up for a while, and I'll be into it, and then I'll be off of it for a while. But nonetheless, I tend to assume that everybody out there knows as much about it as I do, and I know that's wrong because I'm weird, and there's certain things that I get really into.
Say that again.
I'm weird, and there's certain things that I get into, and I tend to retain that knowledge. There are a lot of things, however, that I don't retain knowledge about. So it's wrong for me to assume that people would necessarily know, and there are a lot of things to this case.
But I was going to say, again, this news article, this upends it. This just changes everything, but before we get into that...
It really does. If true, it upends it. It
right.
really does.
So before we get into that, let's just kind of recap the assassination and the Warren
because
Commission.
like I said, it's a gigantic story, and there's a lot to it. So it's just so people have a context for it, we'll give you a quick background on it. On Friday, November 22nd, 1963, President John F. Kennedy was assassinated in Dallas, Texas at approximately 12:30 p.m. while he was riding in the back seat of an open-topped limousine. His wife, Jackie, was sitting next to him on his left side. John Connally, the governor of Texas, was sitting directly in front of the president. The presidential limousine was part of a large motorcade that had traveled from Love Field, a local airport where Air Force One, the president's plane, had landed earlier that day. President Kennedy was facing re-election in 1964 and was on a multi-city visit to Texas to strengthen his political standing there. The motorcade consisted of 17 cars carrying various dignitaries, including Vice President Lyndon Johnson, Texas Senator Ralph Yarborough, Congressman Jim Wright, and other local officials and journalists. The car immediately following the presidential limousine, however, was carrying several Secret Service agents, 4 of which were standing on running boards on the sides of the car. The route of the motorcade went from Love Field and wound through downtown Dallas on its way to the Trade Mart, a large building that's part of a wholesale trade center, for lunch and a presidential speech. The Trade Mart is located just outside the downtown area along the Stemmons Freeway. The best access to the Stemmons Freeway from downtown required the motorcade to pass through Dealey Plaza, a large grassy area bordered by the Elm Street to the north, Commerce Street to the south, Houston Street to the east, and a railroad line to the west. Main Street goes through the middle of the plaza. Elm, Main, and Commerce Streets converge and go under the railroad through a short underpass, the other side of which gives access to the freeway. After the presidential limousine made a slow left turn off Houston Street onto Elm to begin heading west toward the freeway, it passed by a 7-story building known as the Texas School Book Depository. Just as the limousine went past the book depository building, President Kennedy and Governor Connally were struck by high-caliber rifle bullets. The presidential limousine and the trailing Secret Service car sped to Parkland Hospital, where both men were treated. Although both had serious wounds, Governor Connally survived, but President Kennedy died at 1 p.m. At approximately 1:15 p.m., Dallas police officer J.D. Tippit was shot to death in the Oak Cliff area of Dallas, south of downtown, by an assailant carrying a handgun. At around 2 p.m., the Dallas Police Department arrested Lee Harvey Oswald inside the Texas Theater, approximately 2 blocks from where Officer Tippit had been murdered. Oswald was taken to police headquarters, where he was questioned over the next 2 days. He was charged with both the murder of President Kennedy and Officer Tippit. Oswald maintained his innocence throughout the questioning. Among the evidence that tended to incriminate Oswald included the fact he worked at the Texas School Book Depository, from where several witnesses said they heard gunshots emanating. A 6.5 millimeter Mannlicher Carcano rifle, a World War II Italian surplus rifle, was recovered from the 6th floor of the book depository building and was ultimately traced to Oswald. Also, a 6.5 millimeter bullet was found on a stretcher at Parkland Hospital, where President Kennedy and Governor Connally had been treated. The bullet was in almost pristine condition. On Sunday, November 24, 1963, as the Dallas police were transporting Oswald from the basement of police headquarters to the county jail, Oswald was shot and killed by Jack Ruby, a Dallas nightclub owner. In the wake of the assassination, President Lyndon Johnson created the Warren Commission to investigate what happened. The Warren Commission was a 7-member panel headed by Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, Earl Warren. There were numerous lawyers assigned to the commission, and it utilized the FBI to interview witnesses and conduct analysis of forensic evidence. Ultimately, the Warren Commission concluded that Lee Harvey Oswald acted alone in both the assassination of President Kennedy and the murder of Officer J.D. Tippit. In addition to other conclusions relating to the assassination, the commission found that Oswald fired 3 shots. 1 shot struck President Kennedy that entered his back and exited his throat. This same bullet then entered Connally's back, causing several wounds as it passed through his body, ultimately ending up on a stretcher. The 2nd shot missed, and the 3rd shot struck President Kennedy in the head. The findings of the Warren Commission have been controversial almost from the day its final report was issued in 1964. Numerous authors and researchers have questioned almost every aspect of the case. But for our podcast today, we'll focus on the pristine bullet recovered on the stretcher that has come to be known as the magic bullet.
So our TikTok video was about the news article that was coming out about a book. And the book was written by a former U.S. Secret Service agent who was there that day at the assassination. And his name was?
His name is Paul Landis. And there's absolutely no doubt that Landis was there because there's a famous photo called the Altgens photo, Altgens, that you can clearly see him on the running boards of the car right behind the limousine.
So after 60 years of this assassination, after the Warren Commission comes out, Landis has this idea that he picked up the magic bullet from inside the limousine and he put it on the president's stretcher.
Correct. Yeah, I mean, that's his assertion. So, there's a lot of questions that raises, one of which is, why are you just now coming out with this?
Right.
How come this was not documented anywhere previously? I mean, there's so many questions about this, but the most important issue that this raises is that that's not what the Warren Commission found, and because of some things that we're going to talk about, it means that Lee Harvey Oswald could not have been the lone gunman.
Right.
Okay, there had to be a second shooter if where Landis claims to have found the magic bullet is. So it's history changing if true, okay?
Well, let's jump into it then.
Okay.
All right.
Yeah, so the first thing we have to discuss is this magic bullet, okay? Now, I know from my experience in cases that I've worked, seeing bullets that have gone into bodies and been recovered later. Some of them just get absolutely mangled.
They get damaged. They get
just smashed and deformed in all kinds of ways. But believe it or not, I actually have seen a case where a bullet entered just above the right hip bone, went through, sliced up a whole bunch of inner organs there, and then lodged against the left hip bone, which is a pretty substantial bone. And it was a .38 bullet. And when it was removed at autopsy, this bullet
was still
like
intact.
It came right out of the case. I mean, so bullets do funny things. So the fact that it was actually in pristine condition is not necessarily impossible. Like I said, I've seen firsthand that this happens.
But it's the fact that Landis finds it in the back seat of the limousine.
Absolutely. I mean, that's what changes history, if true. Okay, let me explain real quick why that is. So there's something called the Zapruder film, and it was a film made by a local businessman that was actually at the scene filming the assassination. And on this film,
he's not really filming the assassination. He's filming the presidential motorcade that day.
Yeah.
We know the routes of the motorcade were printed in the newspaper. People came out to watch it that day.
Yeah, it was a big deal. It would have been something really neat to see, right? So yeah, a lot of people had gathered, and he had a fancy new video camera that was very high tech and probably very expensive for the day. Anyway, he ends up filming the assassination. I mean, he captures the whole thing. We know, so because of that film, we know the times when Kennedy was hit, when Connally was hit, and ultimately when the president received the fatal head wound. All that is we know the time sequence because of the film rate of the camera, right? Also, the police recovered 3 shell casings from a 6.5 millimeter rifle.
And they recovered that inside the school, but
in the 6th floor, where they recovered this rifle, okay? And so the Warren Commission is working with 3 bullets. They make the assumption there's only 3 bullets, and they make it fit on the time sequence that the film requires.
In these 3 seconds.
Exactly. So it's a little more than 3 seconds. The total film is maybe 20 seconds or so, but the actual, when we first see that Kennedy is hit to where he receives the fatal headshot is maybe 3-4 seconds, something like that. So to make it work, because of the film, they determined that Kennedy and Connally must have been hit by 1 bullet. In other words, a bullet that entered Kennedy's back, exited his front, hits Connally in the back, rebounds around in Connally, and then ultimately was dislodged somehow when Connally's on the stretcher.
And this will become the magic bullet.
That's the magic bullet, and that was the Warren Commission theory, because that fit what they saw, with the 3 shell casings, and so they assume there's 3 shots. So that's how they make the 3 shots fit on the Zapruder film when you see the wounds happen. Okay. Now, a lot of people have a real problem, with this magic bullet, that it bounces around Connally's body. I think it hits a rib. It hits the wrist bone, which is a pretty heavy bone right there. You would think that there'd be more deformity to the bullet than was on there. There was a little nick on it, and it was a little bit twisted, but otherwise it was in really good condition.
And this bullet will be found at Parkland Hospital on the governor's stretcher.
Yeah, and just to give a little detail about that. So when Kennedy, when the motorcade gets to, when the presidential limousine, that is, gets to the emergency landing area at Parkland Hospital, they're taken into 2 separate trauma rooms. They're put on a stretcher and taken into to these trauma rooms. And of course, it's absolute mayhem. So, because obviously the doctors, the nurses, they're working to try to save their lives. So they're not focused on what might or might not be on a stretcher or whatever. They're focused on trying to save lives. In the aftermath of once the president's dead and then Connally was stabilized, later an orderly finds this bullet on a stretcher that's out in the hallway from where these trauma rooms are. And the best guess that the investigators made was that must have been Connolly's stretcher.
Fell out of his body.
Yeah. Somehow after it bounced all around him, it hit his wrist. That I think ultimately there was a small wound. It would have bounced back and hit his thigh, but it didn't have enough energy
to enter,
to go very far, if at all, and so it just maybe lodged there between maybe the pant leg and the skin. And so, obviously in a trauma situation like that, they're going to cut the pants off, and so in this whole process is maybe how this bullet falls out. But beyond that, it was just speculation on their part that this is Connolly's stretcher, so.
But now we have Landis coming forward and saying, after 60 years, he finds this bullet in the back seat, and he put it on the stretcher.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, he claims that. So let me back up real quick about Landis. So Landis was, and Todd, actually go into this a little bit, because Landis was part of Jackie Kennedy's protective detail.
He was on the First Lady's detail.
Right. And because she was traveling with the president, obviously, then you're going to have her detail and the president's detail. And so that explains why he was there. What he claims is when they got to Parkland Hospital, his main focus is protecting her.
Right.
And let's face it, we know this all in hindsight. At the time, as this is happening, they don't know who fired these shots. This could be like some kind of coup d'etat. It could be, who knows what. So his focus is on protecting her.
Right.
But she's clearly in a daze. Understandably, she's in shock. She doesn't know what to do. She doesn't know where to go. He has to coax her out of the car, to get her inside the hospital. And in the process of getting her out of the car, he sees this bullet that's on, for lack of, it's a convertible. And so I think basically where maybe the roof would have attached to the car, there's a little ledge there. And the best way of the description that I've read, that's where he says he found it. It was on this ledge of the back seat where Kennedy was sitting. So he gets Mrs. Kennedy and gets her inside the hospital. He's got this bullet in his pocket, and he realizes, this was out there and I need to just keep this with the president. So he puts it on the stretcher at the president's feet, and then doesn't think about it again for 60 years.
But it's hard to believe that a trained law enforcement person would pick up evidence from a crime scene and move it, and then not tell anybody about it.
It seems crazy to me. Because unlike the FBI, Secret Service, you guys have a dual mission. One being obviously protecting the president or other dignitaries. But you also
have an investigation mission too.
Yeah. So I found the people that ultimately kind of end up as investigators are curious people by nature, puzzle solvers. And when you find a piece of evidence and you find something that in a case, you have a lot of curiosity about how this fits into it, and ultimately how did this turn out? But apparently he never asked those questions at all.
And the Warren Commission never interviews Landis.
That's right. Yeah, he was never interviewed. I think he did do a couple of reports, but it was just the bare facts about maybe where he heard shots and how he responded. But he didn't indicate anything in his reports about this bullet at all. So, again, just to clarify why this is important, because some people may hear us talking about this and think, well, what does that matter? It's a huge deal, because if the bullet is found on Connolly's stretcher, and that means it fell, it was somehow attached to Connolly, right? That's how it gets on that stretcher. That means that this bullet would have gone through Kennedy into Connolly and ended up there. So, versus the bullet being found in the back of the limousine, there's no way that this bullet would have gone through Kennedy into Connolly and then somehow
made a U-turn
and ended up back on this ledge of the car. So what it means is, if it's found where Landis says it's found, the bullet never went into Connolly. That means it's a separate bullet that goes into Connolly. And because of the timing that we know has to happen because of the Zapruder film, Connolly had to have been hit by a second bullet.
shooter.
And that the reason for that is Oswald would not have had time to fire those 3 shots, hit Kennedy, hit Connolly with a second bullet, and then hit Kennedy again with the headshot. Oswald does not have time to operate this old Italian bolt-action rifle. He doesn't have the time to do it, okay? And just another explanation for those folks that might not be fully familiar with when I say a bolt-action rifle, there's really, I guess, 2 basic types of operation of a rifle, one being a semi-automatic type operation versus a bolt-action. And so very simply what that means is in a semi-automatic rifle, the action of a bullet being fired actually operates what's called a bolt. It moves the bolt backwards. The bolt then ejects the round that's just been fired, ejects a shell casing. Then the bolt comes back forward and loads another round into the chamber. It basically cocks the firing pin back, and all you have to do is squeeze the trigger again. Okay, so it's boom, 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 and all you're doing is just pulling the trigger. A bolt-action rifle is just what the action is you manually are operating the bolt. There's a handle on the side of the rifle that you cock up, you pull the bolt back, that ejects the round that's just been shot. You then move the bolt forward manually. You put the handle down to the side. That engages the bolt, which contains the firing pin. That fires a round. You operate it again.
And you're going to have to aim and squeeze the trigger
Correct.
all within this time.
So the FBI, the Warren Commission, utilized firearms experts, shooters, to see if this could be done. You know, how long does it take to operate this rifle? And I think the best shooters in the world, the best they could do operating that bolt, aiming and firing and hitting the target was like 3.2 seconds, okay? There's not enough time in that, because of the Zapruder film, we know there's not enough time to cause the wounds, separate wounds to Kennedy and Connolly with that rifle with that magic bullet not going through Kennedy and Connolly.
Right.
So Landis' story is earth-shaking if true. So it means there's at least one other shooter in addition to Oswald.
So again, we put this video up on TikTok.
Yeah.
We talk about the information that Landis is going to have in this news article.
Yeah, and give some explanation of what I just said about the bolt-action rifle and why that timing, it wouldn't work. The timing wouldn't work.
And it's crazy that the video gets removed.
It's absolutely nuts. It's beyond me why this thing gets removed.
It's crazy. Like we said, within 12 hours, we have over 700,000 views. I mean, we're coming up on 1 million views on this video.
Yeah.
And it's removed.
Yeah, because, I think people realize the importance of this, and so they rightfully were like, wow, this story is important. There's something to this. And then it gets yanked. So there's so many things about the Kennedy assassination that are unexplained. And, every case that, you have as an investigator, there are unexplained aspects to it. There are anomalies, that you just don't know what happened. And that's I'd say almost any case has that, right?
But a bullet taking a U-turn?
Exactly. It would have to take a U-turn to land back behind Kennedy if it went through Connolly.
But again, that is all goes back to if Landis is correct in finding this in the back seat.
Exactly.
And again, that's
so let's talk about that for a second. So Landis apparently was, traumatized by this event, and that's why he ends up leaving the Secret Service a couple of years after the assassination. Goes on to other things in his life. Out of law enforcement. No doubt, it would have been a traumatic thing to see because we know, like I said, there's a famous photo. He's right there. I mean, he saw it. He was right in the middle of it. You know, he was at Parkland with Jackie. That had to be just gut wrenching to be involved in. And he, you know, what he claims is he just walked away. He just didn't ever want to revisit anything about that day again. So he just forgot about it. I guess he ignored TV.
The Warren, he ignored the Warren Commission.
And apparently the Warren Commission ignored him. You know,
Wow.
You know, I think he submitted a couple of reports as required. You know, but I'm not sure if those reports actually became part of the Warren Commission, the official Warren Commission report. I'm not sure about that, because there's a lot of stuff that's part of the overall case that maybe wasn't included in that report. So, yeah, so he goes all these years. I guess he never sees, you know, any kind of report, any kind of book, nothing about it. Yeah, I guess if his story's true, he purposely ignores all this. He just doesn't want to relive that day, and so he walks away from it. And then I guess somewhere, I don't know if it was a reunion.
I think he talks to somebody else that was there.
Yeah,
from the Secret
it was a
Service that
reunion
day.
of maybe some of the agents that were there that where this comes up.
And he brings this up that
Yes.
he had found this
Exactly.
bullet.
So that ultimately leads to him writing this book. So really, ultimately, as an investigator, the real question has to be is, you know, because this is so history changing, how do we prove this? How do we, you know, is there any way to confirm this? I think one of the ways it could be done is, you know, would Landis submit to a polygraph? Yeah, I actually haven't seen any. I think he has done some media. I haven't actually seen any of it, but at least from the what I've read, he's pretty sharp. He's all there. There's no, you know, age decline that, you know, beyond normal, but he's mentally still very sharp. So there'd be no reason that he couldn't, you know, do a polygraph.
Maybe someday we can get him a guest on our podcast.
I'd love it, you know, because I'm sure it's a fascinating story to hear, you know. And
well, I think the whole JFK assassination, there's so many more, like you always call rabbit trails,
Yes.
that we can go down on this.
Oh, well, see, I love going down these rabbit trails. I love the great detail that you can go into with these things. Love doing it. To me, it's so much fun.
Well, we love to get comments from our listeners, and they can ask us questions or leave us comments and let us know.
Oh, we want
what,
that
what
stuff.
they want to hear about. And,
Yes.
you know, there's a lot more that we can go into.
A lot
on
more we
this.
can go into. I love the input. I love the questions. I love the comments, because, you know, one of the things that I learned over the course of many years in the FBI, you know, is you have to always be open to input from someone else, you know, or having another pair of eyes look at something, because, you know, you start down, you know, an investigative path, and you might you try not to do it, but you might get locked into, you know, the set of facts that you've seen, and you might make conclusions maybe before you should. And it's just always good to bounce something off somebody else, or have someone else take a look at it, just have it from a different perspective.
Yeah, that's
so
a great point.
The listener and viewer comments are absolutely critical. We want them. We love them.
You know, after this video got removed, I think one of the comments on another one of our videos is, "Whatever happened to you? Were you afraid of your safety because you put this video out?"
Wow. Yeah. You know, actually, I didn't think of it, because I just, you know, to me, I just want to talk about solving a puzzle. And to me, this Landis thing just completely changes the landscape. Again, if it's true, okay? I don't really know anything about the man's character. I don't want to say that, you know, he's lying. You know, I haven't seen anything that he's not sincere about this. So, you know, unfortunately, it's just something that I don't know of a solid way to prove it. But as far as my safety goes, you know, that is one thread of the Kennedy assassination, is a lot of witnesses, that were in and around Dealey Plaza or had some connection to it did die some suspicious and mysterious deaths, you know, in the years, 3 to 4 years after the assassination.
And that's something we can definitely get into.
Yes.
A couple of podcasts down the road.
Absolutely.
So yeah, I think Landis would be a great guest on our podcast.
Absolutely. Hey, Paul Landis, if you're out there listening, come on Back in Crime, the Texas Crime Travelers podcast. We would love to have you.
And if there are any brands listening that are interested in sponsoring, our email's in our description.
So, subscribe, like, and follow us on TikTok, Instagram, and YouTube.
Thank you guys so much.
Thanks again. We'll talk to you next time. This has been the Back in Crime podcast presented by Texas Crime Travelers Todd Hiles and Stewart Fillmore. We are the executive producers. Grace Hiles is the producer and director. Theme music composed by Eddie Bandus. Follow us on TikTok, Instagram, Facebook, and our YouTube channel at Texas Crime Travelers.